Hey everybody, this is Dr. Ben Pearl. Welcome to Fitfoot U, and today we've got a great one actually. It's going to be interesting. David Ashley, he's a hiker. He's attempting a really interesting summit trek. I think aren't you on your way to Nepal? Is
Yeah,
that
I'm heading to Nepal to do an Everest Base Camp trek. Going to co-guide it and climb a mountain called Alma de Blanc while I'm there.
well, listen, welcome. This is going to be exciting because he's going to talk shoes, he's going to talk hiking, he's going to be talking endurance tips, and maybe even for the aging athlete. But first, and I want to sort of get the headline. You've got quite a story, and I'm going to let you tell it rather than me steal your thunder.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. So really what's made me different from other athletes is a Facebook post I saw back in 2016. I had a college classmate who had been ill for a year and a half, had almost died from sepsis due to the port that was installed in his arm because he needed dialysis and his kidneys had suddenly failed. He's around 45, 44 at the time, good shape, a swimmer, and no one in his family could help him out. And I saw a post on our private Facebook group with our West Point class, and I decided to get tested. Turned out I was a match, and I donated a kidney to him in January of 2017.
How old were you when you did that, David?
I was 45 years old then.
Mm-hmm. And I assume it was hopefully a storybook ending. What happened after the donation?
Yeah, great question. I should have led with that. He's doing fine now. The organ took. He's super religious about taking his anti-rejection drugs, which is so critical for people who receive a donated organ. And what I didn't share with you yet is that leading up to the decision to donate, I am an endurance athlete. So at the time, I was big in a sport called adventure racing, also ultra marathoning, long mountain bike rides, and road cycling. And I didn't know what life would be like as an organ donor. And I thought I might have to give up the passions that I really love to chase. And I couldn't find anybody at the time who was an ultra runner, who was a multi-day adventure racer or other type of endurance athlete that was an organ donor. And so I kind of had to do it blind. And fortunately, I found out that I did an ultra marathon 40 miler about 4 months afterwards. And, I didn't certainly place or anything, but I finished. About 6 months after, I did a 7-day adventure racing world championships. So that's paddling, mountain biking, and running. And about a year after the surgery, my body was back to normal and I was back to winning racing events again. And that really surprised me. I expected that I would be somehow uh, lose some of my capacity for endurance sports. And it wasn't the case at all.
I think that's a testament to something you must have been doing because, uh, as you know, when your body is subject to trauma, it can be a long recovery process. Obviously, when you're pushing the envelope as you are with your endurance sports, you're always teetering on that edge of that immune sort of not, I don't want to say deficiency, but let's just say, I mean, if you run yourself ragged, you are temporarily immune compromised, and then that's how we build back up. So how did you do it? How did you remain healthy?
Well, the real key is getting a good night's sleep and taking that recovery very seriously. And so I know how to recover well. I often recover longer than other people that I know, but that allows me to get back into training and competition at a high level again versus, like you mentioned, maybe getting sick after a long event and then extending that time till I can get back training and competing at a high level.
So I imagine you aren't the type of person that binge watches The Sopranos and The Handmaid's Tale.
2 episodes in a row is a binge watch for me. No, I cannot sit on the couch for very long. And my wife wisely recognized that years ago. And she used to call herself a race widow when I was gone every weekend, but she's made peace with it now. And, we have an understanding that on the weekends I disappear and then back at the house during the week, at least until I discovered mountain climbing.
Now you have a unique documentation, I think, that's going on. You're going for a Guinness record. Is a Guinness judge coming out with you on your on some of your hikes? How is that happening?
Well, I'm waiting to hear back from Guinness, and they're pretty busy. and they say it can be a couple of months. But there's an established Guinness World Record. It's around 41 days. And this record is for all 50 US states have their highest points. For example, Alaska is the top of Mount Denali. That's the highest point in North America. But Virginia, I just climbed the highest point earlier this week, Mount Rogers. It's about 5,600 feet, and it's about an 8 mile out and back hike with about a 1,500-foot gain. So every state has that highest point. The record is to get to all 50 of them within 41 days. That's the Guinness record. Now, there's another record set by a pretty famous explorer, Colin O'Brady. He's done it in about 22 days. But the way he did it was utilizing some flights within the US, which I think go against what the Guinness record is based on. And so he doesn't have the Guinness record. But in short, I'm going to try to beat Colin's record as well as beat the Guinness record when I attempt this next summer.
And for those of us in Virginia, and I feel a little embarrassed because I know the Shenandoah, everybody knows the Devil's Staircase, but where's Mount Rogers?
Yeah, it's way down a southwestern part of the state. It's probably a good 6.5 hour drive from DC. And there's quite a few high points kind of clustered around that area. You've got the Carolinas, you've got Tennessee. So there's a couple of Alabama are all in that kind of high point of the Appalachian Range.
Now, lightning struck twice for you, apparently. You had another opportunity to donate the most valuable gift. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so following the kidney donation, I didn't realize what would result from that. I thought I was giving somebody else a gift, and it turns out that after the kidney donation, it allowed me to look at my life a little differently and realize that, hey, I'm physically capable, I'm young, there's a lot of stuff I can do. I retired early from my military career at 22 years, and I started spending a lot more time with my family. I started doing a lot more outdoor activities. Then COVID hit in 2020. I had big plans to start doing some real big mountains internationally, but those got put on hold, of course, because people really couldn't travel. And so instead, I heard about the opportunity to donate part of your liver. Now, the liver is a really unique organ. It actually will grow back if you remove part of it, and the part that's removed can grow into a functioning liver for someone who needs a liver transplant. And so I donated part of my liver in May of 2020 at kind of the height of COVID, when there were a lot of hospitals that were shutting down transplantation and not as many living donors stepping forward. And that one was a tougher surgery. But again, I found myself about a year later back on the podiums competing and feeling really 100% again.
Well, man, I get chills just hearing your story, and you sort of put to shame anybody that's irate over not getting their dinner reservation within 30 minutes. It's quite a perspective. I mean, I'll share with you a totally different arena, but I used to do consulting at the National Institute of Health, and you would literally see people that were in a bubble because of some rare disease, some genetic defect. You know, by the grace of God, you end up with a chromosome change where you just can't, you can't be out in open air. And
Wow.
these people, patients at the NIH would subject themselves to studies because they wanted to help others and help themselves. But they knew that if they weren't going to necessarily get out of that situation, they at least wanted the opportunity to help the next wave of people that would have those genetic things. So I just can't say enough about how much we appreciate, particularly people that are in medicine, people that make that kind of sacrifice.
Well,
So
I appreciate that, Dr. Cole, very much.
yeah, no, it's humbling to hear, and it's always a good it's just a good thing as a frame of reference. Tell me a little bit now about tools. Everybody knows hikers like shoes. We were talking just before we started this about an array of different shoes you have. I brought, and I don't know if you have any examples. I brought a couple that we do a lot of these in the clinic, and I actually carry them for my patients. These are Altra shoes because of the wide toe box. We see a lot of people with smashed up toes, whether it be from soccer,
Yes.
ballerinas, dancers, people that wear high heels. So this is like a go-to, and it also has a drop that is very flat, neutral, so that you're not forward and tipping forward. You've gravitated, you told me, to those in some situations. Talk to me about Altras and then some of the other shoes that you get in the rotation and for different situations.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. I used to be a soccer player, and my toes got pretty smashed together. I suffered shin splints chronically, bouts of plantar fasciitis. And it wasn't until about 2015 that I stumbled onto the book Born to Run, and a lot of literature at that time kind of exploding about, hey, don't land on your heel. And I was a chronic heel striker. I would do most of my training on hard surface, sidewalks or roads, so concrete or pavement, asphalt, and I was doing it wrong for the mileage that I was trying to put down. And so I switched to a 4-foot strike method of running, and also switched to a low drop shoe. And I haven't looked backward. I had zero problems with plantar fasciitis or shin splints, but I did notice that my feet were still really well constrained in the shoes. And so I started first with the Innovate brand of shoes made over in Europe. For a while, they were working for me, but then they narrowed them down for some reason, and I needed to find an alternative solution. And I've really gravitated towards the Hoka 1-1s and the Ultras. The Hokas I use for my pavement training. Sometimes you just can't help it, and you've got to be on the hard stuff. And they've got some really great padding that I've noticed my recovery time is really decreased if I do a high mileage run on a hard surface and I'm wearing a Hoka versus another shoe. And the Ultras is my go-to shoe for everything else. So from hiking to trail running to approaches to the big mountains, the wide toe box, the low drop, quality construction. I mean, I'm not sponsored by them at all, but I've got like 7 pairs of them downstairs, and I buy those exclusively now because they just work for me.
Could you tell me, when you talk about approach, what that entails? What technically is the approach where you've worn the Ultras or favored those, and then sometimes I guess you shift sometimes to shoes at more technical parts of the climb.
Yeah, for example, I'm heading to Nepal tomorrow. The approach will be a climb up to base camp, so that'll be on kind of a rocky trail, but smooth for the first couple days, and then it'll get pretty rough. I'll wear my Ultras for the whole thing there, and then I'll come back down, drop off the folks I'm guiding for the trek, and I'll head up to the base camp. And as long as my shoes are warm enough and there's no ice, which would require crampons, I'll wear my Ultras the entire way. They're probably good with my feet till about like 35 degrees. But if I encounter any snow or ice, I'll have to switch on to my boots, which allow for the crampons to be attached. I do have some micro spikes, so I can do a little bit of the transition before I switch. But once you go to those big boots, your pace is slowed quite a bit,
Sure.
and you're limited in your mobility. So I try to stay with the shoes as long as I can.
And as far as the Ultras, which model do you generally favor for the approach, or do you shake it up?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I shake it up. I don't have one particular model. I did love uh, the mountains. They had the Velcro strap across them because those things are bulletproof. If you ever get like in deep mud or something, they will not come off your foot. But they discontinued them, and I looked all over the world trying to buy a couple more pairs in my size, but they were a real popular shoe. Um,
I know they have the Lone Peak out as one.
yeah, I have the
Yeah,
Lone Peak.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
A couple pairs of the Lone Peaks. And then, like I say, once you're into the terrain where it's more technical than the shoe can keep up with, especially when you have to add the crampons. Usually, you're at a double boot at a minimum at that point for warmth, and the rigid sole that allows the crampon to be attached.
For the purposes of weight, do you dump the approach shoe if you make a game time decision to change shoes, or do you have, is there part of your crew that would take that so you don't have the extra weight of another shoe, or is
No,
that
I'll
just
carry it all the way to base camp, and then from base camp up, it's all snow and ice, all glacier, except for a couple of small patches of hard rock.
Oh,
So
okay, so you can
they'll
just
stay
keep
at
it at
base
base
camp.
camp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the transition. So looking now to climb all these high points in the United States. Well, Denali is a multi-day, multi-week sometimes, depending on the weather, climb. But I'm planning on hitting all the other high points, including Mount Rainier, in under 24 hours. And so for almost all of them, I'll be in my ultras. For example, Gannett Peak in Wyoming is one of the most challenging because it's about a 40 to 35 mile, depending on your route, out and back to get it, with some gain and quite a lot of technical scree and talus to go through. And I need a shoe that's light. I need a shoe that will allow my feet to swell. So I typically wear a size one up from what I would normally wear if I'm doing maybe like 8 hours or more in the mountains, because I know my feet are going to swell into them. And the Altra is what works for me.
Tell me about socks. Socks are important too. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, I love wool socks. They're great if they get wet. They dry out pretty well. My skin doesn't really have a problem. I don't blister in them. And if I throw a pair of gaiters, I've got some really lightweight gaiters I love from Outdoor. Oh shoot, what's Outdoor Research? Really lightweight, but just keep like the rocks and small sticks from getting in my shoes. And what a lot of people don't realize is they keep the shoes tied. Like I never have my shoes come untied when they're underneath the gaiter. And so I don't touch my shoes from the time I put them on to start until the time I'm done, unless I've got a creek crossing and the rest of the route is really dry and I want to keep my feet dry. Otherwise, I don't touch my shoes, feet the entire time, and it's a great combo.
Do you find that you, let's say your height, let's say you have a 9 hour segment. I'm just throwing that out. I don't know what your segments are. Would you change your socks at a beverage or food break to have a dry set, or is that just too much time and trouble for you to just kind of want to keep moving for time?
Yeah, that's very dependent. I probably wouldn't do something in that short of a time. But if I'm doing, something maybe 15 hours or more, if I know I'm approaching a, a section where I'm going to get wet, and then the rest of the trip is dry, that's a good time to change the socks and avoid getting trench foot. But if you know you're going to be crossing more creeks or more wet spots, there's no point in it. So instead, I'd prefer a shoe that's one of my older ultras that maybe has some holes ripped in the side that drains really well. I never ever use Gore-Tex shoes because they end up being cups if you step in water over the height of your shoe. In that kind of situation, I'll look for a shoe that drains well and just know that I'm going to suffer a little bit, but it's temporary, and within 24 hours, I'm going to be done.
So now let's move on to something more visceral. There's a lot of popularity, especially during the pandemic, about watching adventure movies about people like you. So we saw a couple of them were out. What were your reactions to a couple of the movies? I don't know if I want to give a spoiler alert to some of them, but some of them involve pushing it to the limits, and one in particular, they pushed it with. I guess one of the guys. This was on doing some climbing, and it wasn't a free climb. I don't want to say. I think it was with ropes, but what they ran into the problem was with the weather, and they just decided to try to go for it anyway, even though it wasn't part of the I guess pinnacle of what this individual was trying to achieve. What's sort of your
Mm.
visceral reaction to some of these films? It's a little different than what you're doing, obviously, but you are, in that same general sport, class. Tell me a little bit.
Yeah, I think if you study the history of mountaineering, most people, when there is a fatality, it's because of a bad decision. And the number one thing you want to do when you're in the mountains is you want to get back safely. And so you need to set up before you start. Hey, here's my turnaround time. Here's the conditions that would require me to shelter in place, hit the emergency SOS button on my GPS device, which you should always carry. I'm not perfect there, but I do have a Garmin inReach and to keep it with me. And you also know when the weather is not trending your way and you want to come back and fight another day. So I don't have a lot of empathy for folks that get into trouble when they make a decision like that and continue knowing they're putting themselves at risk, because they're also putting search and rescue at risk. And so those are, in a lot of cases, volunteers that are going to put their lives on the line to try to get you out safely. I've made 2 mountain rescues myself. Both times that people were unprepared, untrained, didn't have the right gear, entirely preventable. And so I really encourage people when they're out in the outdoors, make sure someone knows where you are, make sure you can call for help via satellite, and make good decisions when it comes to the conditions and the time for a turnaround, especially on big mountains.
Do you think that your time in the military forged your philosophy towards climbing?
Yeah, I certainly do. We learn to suffer with a sense of sarcasm in the military. Certainly, you learn a lot about judging risk because that's a big part of what the military does. You want your soldiers, sailors, and airmen to return home safely. And I spent 27 years in the service, 22 on active duty as an officer, and definitely took with me into the big mountain climbing how important it is to do risk assessment.
Mhm. Have you thought of that maybe you would have a point in motivation for young people that some, particularly during the pandemic, seem to be a little rudderless with just different things that have come with not maybe the types of opportunities that were quite at our fingertips. Let's say in the booming '80s, as they are now in 2022, approaching 23. Have you thought about that as something that might be in the cards for you?
Yeah, I mean, a good example is my daughter was home from college because her college was shut down. And so I said, hey, we're going to go outside. We're going to find something to do. And we found there was a path near a creek that had a lot of garbage, and we cleaned it up. And that motivated her when she went back to school to join a cleanup in the town her school's in, which is St. Andrews in Scotland. And she was videoed and on the local news for doing it. I think some of our younger generation haven't explored the outdoors. And there's a lot of mental health benefits, I believe, that outdoor recreation, no matter really what you're doing, but the fact that you're outside of those climate controlled, human built habitats, and out under the sun, out under the stars, and interacting with other animals and people in a different environment is so healthy for our mental health.
I think there's something too to the time span between stimuli, which I don't think we were designed cognitively to have to process as much information as we do in a typical day, which kind of leaves you a little, I'm in medicine, and I have to tell you, I swam this morning, but just explaining healthcare to patients, and then you also have an insurance layer, it can be taxing. It is something I signed up for. You want to help people, but at the same time, there's no way of saying it. It at times, sometimes you feel like certain situations, it's just sucking that bone marrow right out of you. It's not like I'm going to go adventure climb for 8 miles after a day at the office. But that is why I look forward to those long periods of time. You're in a different sort of situation where you can tactically space out your efforts. You mentioned recovery. How do you handle the recovery? Do you do it in terms of weeks, in terms of just incrementing the days? What is your sort of quote recovery seasonal schedule?
Yeah, well, I've gotten to the point, having done this for so long, that I'm a pretty good gauge of how much I push my body. Most endurance athletes who've been doing it for several years know when you're at a point in an event or a mountain climb, for my case, where you can stop, rest, maybe turn around, or you can dig. And when you start digging, your recovery time is going to grow quite a bit. For me, recovery usually means the first day or two of sitting around trying to watch some Netflix or working on a puzzle, eating some junk food. And then I start walking, I start doing some stretching. And depending on the event, like Mount Everest, I lost 20 pounds. I just did that back in May. And that was a long recovery because I had to get my body healthy enough where I could do workouts that were strenuous. So I was walking, doing slow bike rides, and really focused on healthy eating, getting enough sleep, and allowing my body to get to normal before I can start pushing it into improvement again.
Are you sleeping at times on the side of the mountain?
Oh yeah, I think the last year I did all the seven summits in under a year. I was sleeping on snow maybe about 4 months out of the 12.
That's
So if
cool.
you've
And
never
and
slept on a
so
glacier before, it's a unique experience. It's quite
yeah,
chilling.
how is it that you're kind of what's the technical term for how you're pontooned into the side of the hill?
Well, in my case, as a mountaineer, we typically are on a flatter spot of the glacier. Some of the more technical mountain climbers or rock climbers, they'll use those bivvies that you can hang from a rope. Uh, Boy, I've never slept in one of those. That's a whole different level. And
Even
the
still,
technical
you got
rough
the
lines
wind
have
howling,
place.
and
Oh
you're
yeah,
anchored down. How do you deal with kind of getting your heart rate down to relax and sleep?
the best thing I can say is experience. After a while, you learn what the tent can take and how much your sleeping bag can keep you warm, and how you zip it just right. And I'll tell you honestly, being a living kidney donor, I think I sleep better with one kidney versus two, as my body needs maybe a little bit more recovery. And sleep's never been an issue for me. Even on Camp 4 at Everest, I was able to go to sleep in the few hours we had from climbing to Camp 3 to starting our summit attempt. So I think I'm blessed there, and I really can't help out the folks that maybe are having problems with sleep and exercise.
I'm sure you've got a gazillion interesting stories. Do you have any funny things that have happened along the traversing all the trails and treks that you've done?
Yeah, I do. This is a story from Russia. There was a time last summer, believe it or not, where you could actually get a visa and go to Russia. And it opened up in August, and I think it clamped right back down early in the fall when things heated up in Ukraine. But I took advantage of that and climbed the highest mountain in Europe, which is Mount Elbrus. It's in Russia, right near the Georgian border. And it was a public guided group, and I didn't know who was going to be there. So I showed up. There was a Russian couple, young couple, uh, set to climb this 8,800-foot mountain. They had never used crampons before. They had never used an ice axe before. They had never climbed even a 14er, which in the US we're all familiar with. We've got so many of those. And so I was really worried that I was not going to make the top of the mountain because my one guide would have to turn around, basically to save the lives of these two people that were grossly unprepared for this mountain climb. And the guide, a young woman in her mid 30s, Russian, pulled me aside because she could tell I was getting a little bit worried and I was asking these kinds of questions. She said, "Look, don't solve tomorrow's problem today." And I thought about that a little bit. I was like, all right, what's today's problem? Today's problem, I want to get good food. I want to get a good night's sleep because that's key to being successful on a mountain is you've got to conserve your energy, your
Yeah.
body battery. And so I focused on myself. I stopped focusing on what's not my problem. And sure enough, the weather forecast was abysmal for our summit morning. The other two said, oh, there's no way we're going outside in that. And I was like, woohoo. So me and the guide shot up the mountain, tagged the summit, came back down. She gave me a hug and said that was the fastest summit she's ever done, and everything worked out. So I learned a real valuable lesson there that I've since shared with friends and family. Is hey, let's deal with this kind of things that makes us anxious. Focus on the things we can control. Focus on the things that are in the near term. Try to let the other stuff go and just wait and see what happens.
I think that's great advice. So many situations in life, if we just let it play out, the dynamics can change ever so slightly where all of a sudden something may fall in your favor. It's kind of like a clock going around sometimes. Doesn't always work out that way. So like you said, you sometimes have to know the signs when it's time to turn around.
Yeah.
What other piece of advice would you give to people pursuing adventure climbing, hiking? Things that we might not think about.
Well, I was reluctant for a long time to go overseas, and I spent a lot of time in the United States hiking and climbing different mountains. And then when I finally took a jump and went over to Chile and climbed a mountain near Santiago, I was blown away not only at how massive that mountain was, but the culture, the food, the people, learning about their politics, opened my eyes to how lucky we are, how grateful I am to be in this country. And as I've continued to travel all the seven continents and all over the world on adventure races and climbs, that I've really solidified that opinion that we need to travel in order to be balanced and grounded as people. And I encourage people that are into hiking and climbing, take a trip overseas, go somewhere that's always interested you. We only are on this earth for a certain period of time. So don't put something on the bucket list and just keep it there. Go chase those passions and chase those dreams.
Yeah, I always say to my workaholic colleagues, there ain't no luggage racks on a hearse. So I agree 100%. Uh, if people want to follow your exploits, are you going to have I know it must be tough to keep a blog when you're trying to make time, but how would they follow your exploits? Are you going to
Yeah,
do
that's
ex
a
post
great
facto
question.
or go ahead?
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to about a year after I did the kidney donation. I was struggling with, hey, how can I tell other people? I'm back to now being competitive and posting great times at endurance events. How can tell other people that you can be a living donor and still get back into these kinds of sports, focused on military members and athletes? And so I set up a website, Facebook name, and Instagram account called Adventure Kidney. And ever since then, I've been sharing the details. I rode the Great Divide on my mountain bike from Canada to Mexico. One example of things that I've done as a kidney donor that most people would be very surprised, I think, to hear. Oh, you can do that. And I'm trying to get the word out to more people so they don't have to be faced with the same situation. If, God forbid, someone they know and care for deeply needs a donation, or they feel inspired to donate to someone they don't even know, that as an athlete, you absolutely can get back into endurance events like mountaineering, like bike rides, like ultra marathons, even though you're an organ donor.
That's awesome.
So that's adventurekidney.com, and on Facebook and Instagram under Adventure Kidney.
That's good stuff. Any parting words or last thoughts that you would like to leave people with? I mean, it's just been inspiring just hearing you. Like I said, I have goosebumps. We see so many. Our culture is very sort of iconic about the celebrity around sport, and you're a guy that's probably going to become more well known with your story about the donations, but you're kind of sliding under the radar, but just doing something for the sake of doing it to see something, a higher purpose than just yourself. And I wish there were more people like you in the world, frankly. But it is very inspirational to hear it. But any other parting thoughts that you'd like to tell people?
Well, you're very kind with those comments, Dr. Pearl. And if I could leave anything with the listeners, especially considering your practice and specialty with the feet, is get off the hard surfaces. I think that's the number one thing I've done for both my enjoyment and the health of my body. Is our structures are not designed for pounding on hard rocks. Our bodies weren't built that way. So, and I think there's also so much more to enjoy when you're on a trail. You get the lateral motion, you get your ankles rolling a little bit. You might trip a couple times because you're too interested in looking at all the scenery. But ever since I've switched to trail running from running pavement, my joy has increased. The injuries are almost zero. So really encourage everybody to find a gravel road, find a dirt trail. If you're used to running on pavement, give it a try and see what your body says about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And really, it has been shown that variability leads to more diversity with how the forces are being absorbed in our body. So it's not the same repetitive
Right.
motion that, for example, starts off a shin splint.
Yeah, like a cyclist, they have that repetitive motion injury. Runners on trails, really shouldn't have that because the stride length is different. How you hit is different. That's a great point. The diversity of motion is huge.
Well, we're bringing it home, David. Where do you call home? We haven't even gotten to that. Where's home for you?
Right near East Falls Church Metro in North Arlington. And I'll be here for a number of years. I do guide treks out to Nepal to Everest Base Camp. So if anybody wants to go out and see the beauty of Nepal and chat about what it's like to climb Everest, please reach out to me. You can find my contact information on Adventure Kidney website or again on Facebook or Instagram.
Man, it's been so inspirational. I look forward to hearing more. I'm going to read about your future treks, and please promise to come back in maybe 2 or 3 years so we can hear how this record. Hopefully, you make it to your goals, and I'd love to hear more about what your feat has done in terms of inspiring others along the way.
I'd love nothing more than that. I really appreciate your time this evening and the chance to share my message and share the story about living donation with the listeners you have to the podcast.
Folks, this guy is the real deal. Again, there's just a lot of stuff that we see out there that's very much a distraction, but it's nice to sort of take it to the earth and the stars and why we're really all here to help each other out. until next time, this is Dr. Ben Pearl with Fitfoot U, and I certainly wish David good weather, and it's always good to be a little lucky on the hikes as well. So I wish you all the best
Absolutely.
health and luck.
Thanks, Dr. Poe. Appreciate it very much.
All right. There we go.